interesting experience of a movie this has been. What an interesting trajectory I myself has had it from the film festival circuit to now. Well, it's not that interesting. It's just that I had tickets to see it at TIFF, and then I saw Megalopolis and realized that Emilia Perez was a cartel musical, not played for comedy, and felt I'd subjected myself to enough experimentation for the week. And I am glad I waited, because the movie is certainly an experience, and it's one that I'm very glad I got to experience from home. But I didn't think it was completely horrendous, at least not when directly comparing it to something like Megalopolis. I do think it's pretty gross in a lot of ways, but the first half at least had me engaged to see where it might have been going outside some of these absolutely absurd scenes and musical stellars, that many of which were very less than stellar. But I suppose when you're running this many songs, yes, I understand it's a musical, but this is a lot of songs to be in one musical. They can't all be winners. But then it starts getting into that second half, and it's yikes. But overall, this movie was really just a bummer. I know I talked about it a little bit in my Golden Globes video, and that's kind of the reason why I'm doing this. A lot of people were like, I don't want to watch the movie, but I kind of just want to know what's going on with it. And normally I avoid talking about things, and I'm just kind of like, I don't want to bring more attention to this, but I think it's kind of impossible for this to have any more attention on it than it's gotten, which we will get to. But overall, like I mentioned there, I think that this is an incredibly regressive story that goes off the rails in the least interesting way by the end, and really just one-ups everything in the most tragic and dumb ways possible. I hate this movie because it's just bad and feels like a way to let people who think they're more with it than they actually are pat themselves on the back and talk about how cool, with it, and progressive they are. And I think that sucks, so I'm just gonna highlight 3 different movies that kind of deal with that like trans experience in very different ways, so hopefully at least one of these appeals to you, starting with Will and Harper, which is a buddy road trip movie with Will Ferrell and his best friend Harper, who has transitioned. It's very good, and this definitely feels like the more solid, like introducing people maybe into some different ways of thinking and acceptance. This one's also distributed by Netflix, so I definitely recommend watching Will and Harper over Emilia Perez. I saw The TV Glow, which is a heartbreaking and haunting movie about letting your authentic self die and using nostalgia to hide away from it, with the ultimate message, especially to the audience, that there is still time. I have an entire video breaking down that movie if you end up watching it and feel like you need to go in a little bit deeper. I definitely recommend it. I know it's on Crave in Canada, so I assume it's on HBO Max in the States. And then if you just want something super weird and wacky and very authentic and experimental, there's The People's Joker, which should be on Mubi. I know a lot of people are so hyped on that movie, so definitely check it out if it seems interesting to you. And if you have Mubi, you can also watch The Substance. But yeah, I was fine just letting Emilia Perez kind of stay over in its little corner without really speaking up about it. You know, the entire country of Mexico seemed to have the criticism on lock. But then it started to seriously enter awards conversations. Nominated in categories where maybe it could fit, but then significantly better movies were completely being shunned. Then it actually started winning those awards, just snatching up categories that should have been shoo-ins for other movies. Then we got to the Oscar nominations, as seen above, where it was 1 nomination away from tying with 3 movies that have received the most nominations in the Academy's history. I realize that being a musical automatically gives it the edge in terms of number of nominations, because if a musical's at least done somewhat competently, the chances of it ending in on original song and original score are pretty high. And then France went ahead and put it in as their international choice, which gets into a category a lot of movies just aren't eligible for. But speaking of international, have you heard of today's sponsor, Saley? Saley is a new eSIM that lets you choose from a variety of affordable plans in over 180 countries and 8 regions, so you'll always be able to stay connected when you travel. This means you don't have to worry about finding a local reputable eSIM card, worry about compatibility, and then you can save time while you're traveling. They even have global and regional plans, so if you're going somewhere and you plan to travel through a bunch of different countries in that region, you can just get by on one plan. And that just takes so much of the mental stress out of the occasion while traveling, because you know it's just going to activate the second you land. And I know what you're probably thinking, well, Amanda, my roaming just kicks in most of the areas I travel to. Why would I bother with an eSIM? Well, friends, cold hard cash. I was just in the United States for the Sundance Film Festival, and my phone bill was about $160 more expensive than it normally is, and that's not taking into account the 3 days of February that I haven't been charged for yet. Whereas I'm about to be at South by Southwest for about the same amount of time, and it's gonna cost me just under $12 using code JEDI for the 5 gig 30-day plan. And that's more than enough gonna cover my needs for this trip, but I could just pay for one of the higher plans if I needed, and I'd still be saving a ton of money on roaming fees. It's important to always always be connected, especially when you're traveling to a new area, and Saley makes it easy and affordable with 24/7 support and a full refund if for some reason your device isn't eSIM compatible. So make sure to check out Saley for yourself by going to saley.com/Jedi to get an exclusive 15% discount. But it still seems like entirely too many nominations. Like, it's tied with Gone with the Wind? 13 nominations, my 13 reasons why. Selena Gomez, you strike again. Selena Gomez is in Emilia Perez and one of the producers on 13 Reasons Why, so it's layered, guys. La La Land's still on top though with 14 nominations. Get fucked. Here's to the ones who dream, baby. Sorry. But it's because of all these nominations, or I suppose maybe more specifically, these snubs that occurred as a result of all these nominations that have made people a lot more hostile towards this movie. So the heat was already rising from a lot of like public-facing critics who just really did not enjoy this movie. Again, as I mentioned, the entire country of Mexico, and then a lot of people who are trans, or at least in the trans or LGBTQ+ community, having a lot of issues with it. And then it just continued ramping up with the recent collapse of Carla Sofia Gascon's reputation due to some of her public statements, and then a slew of past hateful social media posts being revealed. Comments from director Jacques Audiard stating that he didn't feel the need to do additional research about Mexico and the crime world he was putting to screen, and a severe lack of involvement from people within Mexico for any other key positions like production design or costuming, including the casting director basically implying that they couldn't find enough talent from within Mexico for parts outside of Adriana Paz. So yeah, I can definitely see why they're all pissed. But in my opinion, it's almost unfortunate that it's taking actions outside the movie to lead to people being like, I just don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole anymore, when the movie itself should just not be getting this much attention. I don't want it to lose because of things people did outside of the movie, which are rightfully being criticized. Just want to clarify that. I want it to lose because people realize it shouldn't win. Like, yeah, there's categories where it'll take home wins and I'll be like, you know what, that's fine, that was really good. Like, I'm pretty sure Zoe's gonna take supporting actress. She wouldn't be my first choice, but her performance is really solid outside some of those like really weird screams she does when she's like being shocked or surprised. But yeah, the movie itself is just weird, and not the good weird. It has like a promising, interesting base premise, but then just in my opinion, terrible execution. If this movie brought you joy, if you really enjoy it, I am happy for you, but I do digress. We'll have to wait to see what happens at the Oscars and hope that something else prevails for Best Picture, and even more so in that international category, because that's the one where it seems the most likely to actually win, and that is such a disservice to the other movies in that category. I really think it needs to go to I'm Still Here, but any other movie in that category would be better, and they're all very good, and you should check them out when you get a chance. All right, so what is Emilia Perez? Well, the basics are actually pretty interesting. A local lawyer stuck in a cycle of helping her boss get some of the most vicious criminals out of jail instead of bringing them to justice ends up hired by a cartel boss to help them start a new life. And why do they want to start a new life and disappear? Because they're transgender and need to medically transition. So many directions where that could go. Let's talk about what they chose to do with it. Now, despite the award season telling us that Carla is the lead and Zoe is supporting, a large chunk of this movie is completely in Zoe's perspective. So after a particularly brutal trial where Rita is responsible for helping a guy get off for killing his wife by making it seem like it was a suicide, she receives a mysterious phone call from someone who seems to know that she's clearly the mastermind behind all of her boss's success before she's kidnapped and carted to a notorious cartel boss who wants to employ her. Now, the reasons Emilia wants to hire her are kind of weird, because at first it's just getting her to scope out doctors and clinics around the world where they'd be able to recover in secrecy, but then it seems like they also want her to help orchestrate their fake death and ensure that their family is taken care of. Having a lawyer scope out the doctors seemed really weird, but sure. Now, before we get to that song, there was one before this where Zoe's singing about hating her fat ass, which is just not factually correct, I'm sorry. But the overall song is just to establish her discontent with her life, that she works so much, doesn't really make that much money for all the horrible things she has to do, can't start her own practice because of the color of her skin, works too much to have a family, and then of course, yes, her fat ass. But by establishing that discontent, it's supposed to make us be like, oh yeah, that's why she's agreeing to work for a cartel boss, okay. Now, she's obviously shocked that this is why Del Monte wants to hire her, and then gets more shocked that to like prove that this is something that they actually want to do, Del Monte ends up flashing Rita to show that she's already started some of that physical transition process, which I thought was unnecessary, but okay. But yes, that finally leads us into the song la vaginoplastia.
Very nice to meet you. I'd like to know about sex change operation.
I remember when some people online were like, well, of course this seems ridiculous, it's out of context. But no, it's ridiculous in context, and honestly, the more context we get, the more horrible it seems. If this was a satire or trying to land something through comedy, this would have worked, but to be delivered as a joke in an overall seriously toned movie, horrible. We're laughing, but not for the reasons the movie wants us to. They even take a second to have Rita ask about like how much it would cost to get her butt done, which just felt weird in the wider context of what's going on in the movie and in this moment. I think the song is supposed to be compared to the one we're about to see, where the doctor starts a conversation about souls and what's going on inside a person regardless of what the outside reflects. So the first place is supposed to be the more shallow view of transitioning and reducing it right down to the physical, but I think it was a bad way to show that when you have Rita excitedly singing along to every procedure name like Oprah's handing out cars. I literally just have not been able to get over this song and could genuinely make like a 10-minute segment dedicated just to it. But the main point is I find it really bad and very funny, but not for the reasons they want me to think it's funny. This almost immediately leads to another bad song with a doctor in Tel Aviv where he's basically saying that Rita's client only wants to transition to escape their past, which is wild. Like, why are we even wasting time suggesting that someone would change their gender over just having like very drastic cosmetic surgery to change their appearance if the only aim was running away from cartel life? The only valid point I'm gonna give him is when he's like, look, if they're a wolf now, they're gonna be a wolf after they transition too. Which Rita argues like, no, changing the body changes society and that changes the soul. And maybe to an extent that works, but I just think when you hit the point of being a cartel boss, maybe we just don't have to worry as much about your soul as like the souls you've removed from the earth. Thematically, this one just fell really short for me, and honestly, it sounds really awkward at times, especially early on when the music hasn't really started. The singing just is so weird. The doctor singing, I'm not a fan. There's also this like Mr. Mystery line that they definitely thought they were really smart for, and I hated that one too. But after meeting with Emilia and reading her journal, he agrees to do the surgery. But I feel like I have to point out that Rita wasn't even making the defense of Emilia because of a genuine belief. Her life has now been threatened twice if she doesn't hurry up and find someone to do this surgery, and it kind of feels like it's more about that. And something I didn't love here, it feels like they kind of flip up something that Manita said to Rita earlier, that listening and knowing is accepting, which basically amounted to, if I tell you why I'm here, you have to be in, or you're going to be in a grave, which is kind of the impression I got. And now it seems like it flipped, like, if you know who I am authentically inside, you're accepting me for who I am inside. And I just don't think I appreciate them trying to make me feel this much sympathy for an active crime lord. But just like that, the doctor agrees they do everything in one big go, which would be so hard on the body, and then the immediate focus with her checking her genitals, which would not have remotely been healed up yet, felt a little bit weird. And then it's just nothing. We don't see any part of her establishing a new life. Like, the surgery is just all that's required there. Meanwhile, her wife, who's played by Selena Gomez, which I thought was hilarious because they apparently rewrote her origins to originally be from America to explain why her Spanish is so bad, because I guess Selena Gomez is not actually that good at speaking Spanish, which I thought was hilarious and is one of the many complaints people have. I think at least they went to the trouble of changing the backstory, so I will give them that. I think they did a similar thing with Zoe Saldana because her accent sounds a lot more Dominican apparently. Again, I can't really judge that because I speak French, not Spanish, but let me know. In my last video where I mentioned that, people said that the Spanish in this is actually really bad for a variety of reasons. So, let me know what you're thinking down below. But yeah, she and her 2 children get carted off to Switzerland for her safety, and then they fake Manitas' death so Emilia Perez can go off and live a new life. And this is where things start getting bad, even though it hasn't been great up to this point. It cuts to 4 years later in London, where Rita is now working for herself, much more prestigious, obviously very rich, when she realizes that the woman next to her, Emilia Perez, is that former cartel boss. And she's not there to clean up any loose ends, she just wants more help. She realized she just can't live without her children and wants them back in her life. 4 years later. You want to shake up their life after they're established in Switzerland? And having it done by way of pretending to be her own estranged wealthy cousin to bring them back to Mexico, and then just instantly starts getting overly intimate with them when they have no idea who she is at this point. And I just find this incredibly selfish all around, and kind of plays back into what I think that doctor was saying. It doesn't matter what she changes. If she's a terrible person now, she's still going to be a terrible person later. And even though she's coming across as more kind and nice and generous, we will see that behavior flip the second there's any kind of just inconvenience in her life. And the situation just seems pretty primed to blow up because Jesse, the ex-wife, widower, technically is not at all happy to still have her life affected by the whims of a husband that's technically dead and not really have much agency in her own life. And they give her an entire song here about it, which is kind of the only song I think she sings that feels really necessary for the movie, but also just felt really weird in this moment. And no hate, Selenators, she is very talented. I love Withers of Waverly Place. While I realize the character is important to the story, I don't love the story they end up going with this character, but it kind of just felt like, okay, we got Selena Gomez. We have to make sure we get Selena Gomez singing a lot. But whatever, she ends off this performance by calling someone named Gustavo, who she had apparently been having an affair with before Del Monte's death, and he's the only reason she's agreed to come back to Mexico. Saying that, and I loosely quote that her still hurts when she thinks of him. Oh, okay. Also, cheating on a cartel hubby is fucking bold. So you might think, okay, well, Rita must be kind of exiting the picture at this point, right? But no, Emilia pays her to stick around. Even offers to buy her a man so she can settle down and have kids. And ma'am, I thought you left that life of crime behind. This is when they set up the next stage of the movie that could have been very interesting, when a woman walks up to their table with a flyer talking about how my son is missing. I don't know what happened to him. I just need some kind of peace. And it's pretty obvious that she knows that he went missing because of the cartel. So this leads Rita to ask Emilia how she feels about her past, and Emilia mostly tries to sidestep it as her past life that of course she feels bad for, but it does end up inspiring her to make some kind of change. Kind of spurned on by this moment she has with her own child when he can't sleep, but then starts singing about how Emilia smells just like Papa did, which is comforting to him. Now I think the intention here is to say that like, oh, the kid can just kind of sense this deeper bond with Emilia even though he doesn't know. But the examples are all things like Coca-Cola with lemons, spicy foods, like buddies hitting Dune level cognition here. But it's hard not to think that they might have meant this in a more literal sense, which just would not possibly be true because hormone therapy changes how people smells. I think it's actually one of the first things it starts to change. Again, this just feels like something they missed the mark on in a scene that was otherwise really nice, and I like that we're finally in her perspective and we're seeing her work through a lot of complex emotions like abandoning her children and reckoning with things she did in her past, leading to her starting an NGO with Rita where they'll just, uncover some of these bodies by asking nicely, reaching out to the different sicarios she knows wanted to do good and offering people bribes in prisons. And immediately they're just finding so many different people, which feels a little bit insulting to the task at hand, considering there's already organizations trying to do this and it's a nightmare situation because, no one wants to end up on the bad side of the cartel, and the cartel doesn't want to start announcing where their dumping grounds are. But the altruistic side of this starts maybe trickling away when Emilia starts accepting funding from criminals and crooks, like the exact people that Rita hated having to defend, now trying to look good by funding a project that they've undoubtedly contributed to needing. All while Emilia is accepting this prestige as if she also did not contribute to the problem. This is all happening around El Mal, which is like the one song that seems to be winning a lot of awards, and if it had to be any of them, I am glad it's this one, even if it amounts to nothing. Like, I was really expecting this to become a bigger part of conversation and have the coals held to, but no. Because I don't think working to help people makes amends if you're not willing to fully accept your place in it, especially when you start defaulting to your old ways. And this makes me want to bring it back to something that happens early in the movie. Rita asks Emilia if she wants to change her appearance or her life, and then she says, aren't they the same thing? Implying that Emilia does think this physical change instantly shifts the rest of her existence, so she can just exist as this completely changed individual. Which again, could be so interesting, but the movie is just engaging with it in the worst possible way. Largely with how it's dealing with representation, and also because it's just like really forcing us to stay in Rita's perspective so much of the runtime while doing the occasional little detours to Emilia, who we don't even really get to fully understand. Now, other than the NGO stuff, obviously the movie has to put pressure on the familial side of things because obviously this was an unrealistic plan to continue seeing her children daily, which again is an interesting avenue to go down. She has a conversation with Jesse where Jesse revealed that, she loved her husband so much, but that after the children were born, things changed and she had no idea if that love was still reciprocated. Even revealing the affair she'd had at the time, saying that they couldn't stay together because it was too intense and there's no chance that they could have been together without her husband hunting them down and killing them. A solid scene overall because you're getting some character development out of Emilia finally in her own perspective, dealing with her own life and the things she's done, and finally seeing a little bit of a deeper side to Jesse and the complexity of the relationship that they had and how the love was there and the abusive nature Emilia had in all aspects of her criminal life extending into her personal relationships. Making way for Emilia to have some self-reflection, but no! It again deviates to Emilia meeting a young woman relieved to find that her abusive husband is dead, that Emilia instantly takes a liking to, and they strike up a relationship, but there's just not enough time dedicated here to really care. I think some of this is trying to push the idea that, like, no matter what Emilia does, she's not fully satisfied in her life, but it's probably, again, because she really thought that she could just completely restart, but then realizing she misses her family, she misses her children, she misses aspects of who she used to be. She can't completely shut that off. Not to say that the transition aspect is a mistake, but just thinking that that transition would have solved every issue. But it really just takes this little detour into a romance movie that kind of ignores the fact that Emilia is kind of the same, if not worse in a lot of ways, compared to the husband this woman is relieved to be free of. Like, I think she'd probably like to know if she was now seeing someone who had been heavily involved in cartel violence. But again, we're not really doing much here before it cuts over to Rita at a club, who sees Jesse with Gustavo. And the interesting thing about all the Selena Gomez songs is that they're like very upbeat and they're filmed to feel like music videos. They're like very dynamic, but then the songs themselves just feel like a little excessive for where they are in the movie. Almost like, again, they just really wanted to make sure Selena Gomez had a lot of like flashy songs. But then like sometimes lyrically, it feels like the song should have belonged to someone else. Like the first one is good. It's about her not having agency. And then this new one feels a little bit more like her gaining agency, or at least having more like power in herself and her womanhood. But this leads to exactly what I've been waiting to happen. Jesse telling Emilia that she's marrying Gustavo and that she and the kids will be moving out, which Emilia can't accept. I think she really thought she could just manipulate her way through this situation forever, like she does with so many other aspects of her life. When she realizes that Jesse plans to take the children away, we get to this bigger issue that she starts getting very aggressive and abusive. She pushes Jesse on the bed, she straddles her, her voice even starts getting deeper, which really seems to be taking the terrible option of implying that aggression is inherently masculine and not something Emilia can escape from. Even if that wasn't their intention, it just feels weird. It's also just casually showing Jesse having like a huge trauma response here. I realize that part of what they're trying to say here is that like, hey, look, you know, changing the body does not in fact change everything a person is. But they're doing that in a way that kind of undermines her identity and plays into bad stereotypes. The whole thing gets pushed to a head when Emilia very aggressively says that the children are hers, even though Jesse has no way of knowing that. But even if she did, they're also Jesse's kids. But that's not something Emilia is willing to take into account in this situation. And on the backside of that, Jesse obviously now thinks Emilia is insane and trying to steal her children. And Emilia's way to try to stop that from happening isn't by being honest, which I understand poses its own risks. It's by immediately going back to her old cartel ways and hiring people to beat the shit out of Gustavo and paying him $100K to leave town under threat of death. So this doesn't work, and Emilia wakes up to find Jesse and the kids gone and genuinely pretends to be confused as to why Jesse would do this. Ma'am, you assaulted her. And again, instead of trying to deal with this properly, her response is to cut Jesse off from all finances, which is ultimately going to hurt the kids in the long run if she can't afford to buy them food to try to manipulate them back to her. But again, still using that deeper voice for all of this. Because right now is when everything goes off the rails in a way that I didn't expect. Or at least not in the way they chose to do it. Because Emilia ends up kidnapped, and I assume it had to be cartel related because they were unhappy with her NGO trying to increase the police activity around their dumping grounds. Or maybe somebody figured out who she used to be and they're going to explore things in that direction and force some kind of accountability. But no, it's Jesse who orchestrated the kidnapping with Gustavo to extort $3 million from Emilia through Rita by cutting off 3 of her fingers. Now I get that this is technically still Emilia being on the other side of that same kind of violence that she caused and contributed to, but this is the most absurd way to do it. It really should have been related to that NGO work tying into her past, not a familial quarrel, because it never ends up doing anything with the fact that she gained this fame and prestige around solving a problem that she contributed to and then like getting in bed with other criminals for funding. There's just so many options they could have gone with, and they go with the direction that is primed for the most amount of trauma porn. But we get to the rescue mission with Rita that just leads to a shootout, and it's in that chaos that Emilia reveals to Jesse who she is, and she is so damn shocked. As Emilia is talking about all these little details that she remembers from when they first started dating, as if that makes up for the shit treatment Jesse experienced in the relationship, and now. Also just kind of feels weird as fuck. It was literally like, remember when I was dating your older sister, and I actually wanted to be dating you all along? Yeah, I do too. But not much can really happen after this reveal because Gustavo quickly throws Emilia in the trunk to flee while Jesse's just begging him to pull the car over because she's just so shell-shocked from the reveal, which leads to a struggle in the car where they drive off the side of a cliff and the car blows up for good measure. Are you kidding me? What the fuck did I just watch? What was the point of any of this? You just had so many interesting options to go through. And instead it just chose to be this scattered disaster of a movie that ends up being a terrible representation of just about everything it's trying to put to screen. Like, for the love of God, actually show a reckoning with something from her past to a significant degree. Starting the NGO is not actually reckoning with the past because it's not taking accountability for your actions within that system. Have some consequences here because this doesn't count. This isn't remotely being held accountable for any of her past action. This is just petty melodrama related to her current bad actions. It is so lazy and has now just led to her children having no parents and being raised by Rita. I'm not saying you have to go full American History X where you have two people really reckoning with like the hatred within themselves, making amends and breaking out of that cycle of violence while having the movie still acknowledge that cycle of violence exists around them. But at least do something to show some kind of meaningful change like that movie did, or at least have her kind of come out the other side being like, okay, yeah, I guess there's aspects of myself I can't change, or at least things I haven't actively worked at changing. That does not invalidate my femininity. Like, again, just don't be regressive when showing that, hey, regardless of transition, she just kind of sucks. I get that things don't always have to be a perfect representation. Not all characters need to be morally good. That's actually been a kind of critique lately, that some people do think that characters just need to be morally perfect from the get-go. But this movie's hitting like every negative, tired stereotype in the book, and it thinks it's being deep. I love a morally bad or ambiguous character. I love seeing how far selfish manipulation can be pushed. I just want to see somebody do something useful with it. And then somehow the movie gets even worse. It ends with a song implying Emilia has ascended to sainthood. Like they have a statue, which I hate because there's just nothing saintly going on here. It doesn't even feel that altruistic with the NGO work after a while. It just felt more performative with her. It almost seems like it's saying that like her death absolves her and redeems her actions, so she was able to become this saint-like icon, which is just weird. Like, obviously the song has a lot of personal lines because it's sung by her new partner, who's just being like, oh my god, she was such an enigma, but she's so brave all the time, and she opened up my world and freed me. It just feels like a very weird way to close out a movie that barely gave any time for growth and mostly just maintained the idea that Emilia could never change her abusive and controlling actions, and basically saying, well, through death, you're absolved. And again, doing all that by propping up harmful stereotypes. It just reeks of being uninterested in telling any part of this story with authenticity, which I do believe can be done from people outside the group and topic. One of my favorite movies is Perfect Days, and Wim Wenders is not Japanese, but he respected the culture and the people that he was putting to film. Sean Baker clearly cared to respect the trans subjects he was putting to film in Tangerine, while much of GLAAD has completely vilified Emilia Perez. Tangerine took home an outstanding film award from them. So it can be done, they just didn't do it. The best thing you can say about what they did was actually hiring a trans woman to play a trans character. Outside that, though, the movie really is just messy as hell. It has this central thesis of, does the outside reflect the inside, or is there an unchangeable core in all of us that we can't escape? Something that could very effectively be examined through a trans story, but just isn't happening here. Because as much as they can claim that they want Emilia to reconcile these two sides of herself within herself, she never actually does it, and the movie doesn't actually give any time for her to try. Honestly, so much of the movie being framed in Rita's perspective hurts its chance at getting deeper, and then it just turns into a spectacle of a lazy thriller. And I think a lot of these issues come right from its inception. Director Jacques Audiard based this story off a character in a book called Écoute, which means listen, who was part of a cartel family looking to escape before they inevitably got themselves and their family killed, and wants to do this through transition. Like much of the movie, we're learning about this character through the perspective of a lawyer that was hired to facilitate the transition. And in the story, you can actually see where they got the inspiration for the song La Vaginoplastia while the character was conducting the research. The book even has the Israeli doctor whose primary interest is making sure the person inquiring about his services actually wants to be a woman and actually sees themselves as a woman, which the story in the book never really gets to. It really becomes more focused on this lawyer's perception of transition. He even becomes obsessed with watching transition videos on YouTube and describing it like being addicted to pornography while equally disgusted and fascinated by what he was seeing. Gross! So Audiard took that and the character and built it into a story where the character is like, yes, 100%, I've always felt like a woman, but then didn't really go deeper or figure out how to like adjust parts of the stories for that. Outside of all that, there's the songs, which are not all trash, but a lot of them just feel like filler. And I realize it's a musical, but when you're talking about musical, they're usually driven by like these big musical numbers in between the other acting. It's not constantly pausing to use songs for just passing moments. And I feel a lot of that is just left over from this starting as an opera libretto. But my God, it got so tedious and weird at times. Weird like my hair. But yeah, even without looking for more nuance and really racking my brain over some of the choices here, this movie is just a mess. It's a mess of ideas, of songs, of character motivations, and perspectives that definitely thinks it's doing something deeper than it actually is. It's poorly paced, continuously focuses on the wrong aspects of its story, and chooses the wrong plot lines to explore. The most I can really say for it is that they actually bothered to cast a trans actress, and it took some real big swings. But that's gonna do it for today's video. Let me know what you guys are thinking of Emilia Perez down below. What are your choices for Oscar picks? And like, if you like this movie, I'm really happy for you. Maybe there's reasons that you saw it and liked it, and you're not getting the same thing I and others are getting from it. I would love to see your opinions down below. But thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. All my other social medias are listed down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.